What if your modern high-tech home kills you faster in a freezing winter than a dirty peasant hut from the 12th century? The answer's unpleasant. We are used to thinking of progress as a guarantee of safety, but severe frosts of minus 30 degrees Celsius are completely indifferent to your ideas about comfort. In this battle of architectural eras, there is no room for pity, the romance of knightly castles, or the marketing tricks of modern developers. We will conduct an honest experiment and find out whose walls are actually capable of protecting a person from certain death when the temperature drops to critical levels. There will be no complicated heat conductivity formulas here, only the harsh reality of survival in conditions where every decision made by an architect is worth the life of the occupant. The answer to this question will turn out to be not as obvious as it might seem at first glance to a city dweller. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the absence of one primitive detail in a modern cottage turns it into an icy tomb in a matter of hours. What if I told you that majestic stone castles were the worst place to survive in severe frost? The massive stonework, which we are accustomed to perceiving as a symbol of reliability and protection, actually functioned as a giant cold accumulator. Stone has tremendous heat capacity and at the same time, abhorrently retains heat inside a room, instantly transferring it outside. The walls of a castle could be several meters thick, but this did not save the inhabitants from the piercing cold that permeated everything around them. You could stand close to the hearth, feeling the heat on your face, but at that moment your back would be covered with frost from the icy breath of the walls. This architectural solution was dictated solely by military necessity, completely ignoring people's basic need for warmth. The inhabitants of such fortresses were forced to wear kilograms of wool and fur, even while sleeping, so as not to freeze to death in their own beds. The walls inside the rooms were often covered with wooden panels or tapestries, but this was only a pitiful attempt to insulate people from the icy stone. Condensation constantly accumulated on cold surfaces, turning into a crust of ice or contributing to the growth of mold in the corners of huge halls. Unlike stone, modern concrete structures have a layer of insulation that creates a barrier between the outside environment and the living space. However, medieval stone was a bare, frozen monolith that sucked the life out of anyone who came near it. The architects of the time were well aware of this problem, but sacrificed comfort for the sake of the impregnability of the walls against siege weapons. The only way to warm such a room was to burn enormous amounts of wood, whose reserves were dwindling at an alarming rate. The cold in a stone castle was not just the air temperature, but a physically palpable presence that weighed on people's minds. It penetrated the bones, made movements stiff, and slowed down the thought processes of the inhabitants of these majestic refrigerators. Chronic joint and lung diseases were constant companions of the aristocracy, living in these prestigious but winter-unsuitable structures. No amount of carpets and skins on the floor could completely insulate a person from the grave cold coming from below the stone foundation slabs. The paradox is that the thicker the wall, the longer it took to warm it up by even a degree. A castle that had cooled down over the winter could remain cold even in the middle of summer, retaining the winter chill. This created a unique microclimate in which food could be stored for a long time, but people lived in misery and often did not live long. Comparing this to a modern house seems like a no-brainer, but don't jump to conclusions until we turn off the heating. A modern brick or concrete house without an active heat source cools down much faster than we would like to believe. Thin walls designed for a constant supply of energy lose their thermal resistance instantly as soon as the barrier of hot air disappears. We have become hostages to active life support systems, forgetting the passive energy conservation methods used by our ancestors. Medieval stone was harsh, but it was honest and predictable in its inertia. Unlike modern thermoses, castles were built on high ground for defense, which automatically exposed them to the fiercest winds. The wind blew the remaining heat through the cracks in the masonry and loopholes, turning the corridors into wind tunnels. Drafts swept through the halls with such force that they could extinguish candles and torches, leaving people in darkness and cold. Fighting the wind was as important a task as fighting the temperature, But stone could not protect against everything. Today we solve these problems with sealants and membranes, creating completely impermeable shells for our homes. But as soon as the seal is broken, a modern house loses its properties faster than a holy coat. Medieval architecture did not know about airtightness. It relied on mass and thickness, which worked against it in conditions of prolonged frost. It was a battle of resources against the elements, where man was only a weak link, requiring constant heating. We look at the ruins of castles with admiration, not realizing how much suffering these gray, silent blocks have absorbed. The history of architecture is not only a history of beauty, but also a chronicle of the struggle against the cold, which humans often lost. Every winter was a test of endurance that not all inhabitants of stone fortresses survived. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about living in such a stone refrigerator? Could you survive the winter there? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the analysis of other historical myths. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the main source of heat in a medieval home was also its main enemy? The huge fireplaces that we are used to seeing in movies as a symbol of comfort actually worked like powerful pumps to suck out air. To keep such a huge fire burning, a colossal supply of oxygen was required, which was sucked in from the room itself. This created a constant draft that pulled the already heated air into the chimney, replacing it with icy street air coming in through the cracks. A person sitting by the fireplace experienced a strange and unpleasant sensation. Their face was scorched by the flames, while their back was chilled by the draft. The efficiency of such heating was monstrously low, often not exceeding 10 or 15%. All the rest of the heat literally flew up the chimney, heating the sky above the castle or city. Attempts to close the dampers resulted in the room instantly filling with acrid smoke, making it impossible to stay there. In modern homes, heating systems are based on the principle of heat transfer fluid circulation, which evenly warms the air in the rooms. Radiators and heated floors do not require air to be drawn from the room and do not create drafts that kill comfort. We have learned to separate the processes of combustion and heat exchange by moving the furnace to separate boiler rooms outside the living areas. Medieval people did not have this luxury and were forced to live in close proximity to open flames. The hearth in the center of the room, characteristic of earlier or poorer buildings, was slightly more efficient in terms of heat conservation. Smoke rose and accumulated under the ceiling, creating a warm, albeit suffocating, cushion of air. However, living in a black hut or hall required getting used to breathing smoke and being constantly in a semi-smoke state. It was a choice between clean lungs in the cold and warmth in an atmosphere of constant smoke. In winter, the need for firewood became the main concern of any household. From a peasant's hut to a royal palace, fuel preparation took up most of the warm season, turning into an endless labor marathon. If the firewood ran out in the middle of winter, it was tantamount to a death sentence for everyone in the house. Our modern dependence on gas pipes or the power grid frightens us, but it is nothing compared to the physical dependence on a pile of firewood. People tried to modernize fireplaces by adding metal screens or changing the shape of the firebox to better reflect heat. These engineering tricks only helped a little, without solving the fundamental problem of the open hearth. The stone around the fireplace heated up, but as we learned in the first chapter, it quickly transferred that heat to the outer walls. The comfort zone was limited to a radius of 2 to 3 meters from the fire, beyond which lay a zone of perpetual cold. In a modern frame house, even a small candle can raise the temperature in a room by several degrees thanks to its airtightness. A medieval hall absorbed the energy of entire tree trunks, while remaining only conditionally suitable for living. This demonstrates the huge gap in energy efficiency that humanity has been overcoming for centuries. We have learned to retain joules of energy rather than simply generating them in insane quantities. But there is one caveat. Modern heating systems are completely dependent on complex infrastructure and external supplies. Cut off the electricity, shut off the gas, and a modern boiler becomes a useless pile of metal. A medieval hearth was autonomous, requiring only fuel that could be found in the forest or by dismantling a fence. In conditions of total collapse, Primitiveness becomes a guarantee of reliability, which we have lost. Imagine a situation where, at minus 20 degrees, your smart home is disconnected from the grid and begins to cool rapidly. You cannot build a fire right on the parquet floor in your living room without starting a fire. A medieval house was designed around fire. It was ready to welcome flames into its heart at any moment. This architectural difference determines the chances of survival in an extreme situation of total blackout. Do you think the autonomy of old houses is a compelling argument against the comfort of modern systems? Are you ready to learn a secret that will change your perception of simple peasant huts? Want to know a secret that will change your attitude toward the primitive materials of the past? While lords froze in their stone castles, ordinary peasants often spent the winter in much greater comfort in houses made of branches and clay. The technology, known as cob or half-timbered with adobe filling, was an ingenious composite material. A mixture of clay, straw, manure, and branches created walls that had surprisingly low thermal conductivity. The tubular structure of the straw inside the clay monolith acted like thousands of microscopic air chambers, trapping heat. It was a prototype of modern porous insulation, created intuitively through trial and error over many generations. Such a wall did not freeze through as quickly as solid stone or brick and retained heat from the hearth much better. In addition, clay perfectly regulated the humidity in the room, absorbing excess moisture and releasing it back when dry. Of course, such walls were short-lived and required constant repair and maintenance every season. But in the harsh winter conditions, the ability to repair them with improvised means was more of an advantage than a disadvantage. Any crack could be filled with a handful of clay right on the spot without the need for special tools or materials. Modern composite panels or siding require factory production and skilled installation, which makes them useless when damaged in insulation. Comparing this with modern frame houses, we see many similarities in the principle of multi-layering and the use of air as an insulator. However, modern insulators, such as mineral wool or expanded polystyrene, lose their properties when wet or damaged. A clay and straw wall retained its functionality even when the outer layer was partially damaged or wet. It was organic architecture that lived and died with its owners, but gave them a chance to survive. The walls in these houses were just the right thickness, not too thin to let the cold in, and not too thick to make them hard to heat. The small interior space of a peasant hut meant that the air could be heated up pretty quickly. Unlike the huge halls of a castle, here the heat was concentrated around people, creating a dense atmosphere of survival. Low ceilings prevented warm air from rising too high, keeping it within the human habitat. However, this technology had its own significant drawbacks, which should not be forgotten in an honest comparison. The organic walls were an ideal environment for rodents, which sought warmth just as humans did. Mice and rats gnawed through the straw, disrupting the thermal insulation and bringing disease and discomfort. Modern concrete and foam block structures do not have this disadvantage, creating a sterile barrier against fauna. In addition, clay and straw could not provide air tightness at the level of modern vapor barrier standards. The wind still found its way through microcracks, especially at the joints with the roof or doorways. But unlike the killer draft in a stone castle, here the air seeped in more slowly, mixing with the warm interior volume. This provided the necessary ventilation without instantly cooling the house. Interestingly, modern eco-builders are now returning to these forgotten technologies, calling them energy-efficient bioconstruction. They are rediscovering what was the norm for the poorest segments of the population in medieval Europe. It turns out that a straw block, properly plastered with clay, is 3 times more heat-resistant than brickwork of the same thickness. We often laugh at the fairy tale about the 3 little pigs, where the straw house is shown to be the most unreliable. But if we are talking not about protection from the wolf, but about protection from minus 20 degrees frost, Nuf Nuf's straw house could give Naf Naf's stone fortress a run for its money. History often turns our ideas upside down when the criterion is not strength, but warmth. Like this if you are also surprised by the fact that straw can be warmer than stone. What if everything you've been taught about modern roofing materials pales in comparison to the effectiveness of ordinary reeds? In a medieval house, the roof was the main source of heat loss because warm air, according to the laws of physics, always rises. A thatched or reed roof laid in a dense layer of 30 to 40 centimeters worked like a phenomenally effective blanket. The plant stems created a complex structure with millions of air pockets that did not let precious heat escape. Unlike modern metal roofing or corrugated sheets which freeze instantly and require layers of artificial insulation, straw worked on its own. It did not create cold bridges or condense moisture on the inner surface, allowing vapors to escape outside. Snow falling on such a roof did not melt, but settled in a thick layer, creating an additional layer of natural insulation. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that if the snow on the roof melted, it meant that the owner was flooding the street and the house was poorly built.
And the warmth of the hearth. Cheers.
Modern roofs are complex engineering structures made of films, membranes, wool, and coatings, where a mistake in one layer leads to disaster. A torn vapor barrier leads to the insulation getting wet, and the roof stops retaining heat, turning into an icy crust. A thatched roof forgave mistakes and served for decades, requiring only periodic renewal of the top layer. It was a simple but ingenious system based on the principles of bionics. However, there was a downside to this, making life under such a roof extremely dangerous. Straw, dried over the years, would ignite from any spark flying out of the chimney, like gunpowder. Fires destroyed entire villages in one night, leaving people homeless in the middle of a harsh winter. Modern materials, despite all their shortcomings, have an undeniable advantage. They are non-combustible or low combustible. The angle of a medieval roof was always very steep, so that water and snow would slide off without having time to soak into the material. This created a high attic space, which was often used as a buffer zone or hayloft. The hay stored in the attic served as another giant layer of insulation, separating the living area from the cold roof. Modern attics, where we live directly under the roof, lack this buffer and are completely dependent on the quality of synthetic insulation. Tiled roofs, which began to appear on wealthier homes, were a step backward in terms of thermal insulation. Ceramic or slate tiles are cold, require a strong rafter system, and do not retain heat as well as plant-based materials. The transition to hard roofs was dictated by fear of fire, not a desire to stay warm. People sacrificed degrees of warmth in order not to burn alive in their sleep. In severe frosts of -20 degrees, the difference between a thatched and a tiled roof was physically noticeable. In a house with a thatched roof, the heat lasted until morning, while under the tiles it cooled down by the middle of the night. A modern house with poor roof insulation loses up to 40% of its energy through the roof. Medieval peasants intuitively solved this problem with the means available to them. Of course, a thatched roof was teeming with biological life, from insects to birds nesting there. This coexistence was an inevitable price to pay for warmth and the availability of materials. Modern people are unlikely to agree to put up with rustling and fuss above their heads in order to save on heating. We have chosen sterility and safety, paying for it with dependence on technology. Today, thatched roofs are a sign of elite eco-housing that costs a fortune. What was once a sign of poverty has become a symbol of luxury and conscious consumption. But in the context of survival at -20 degrees without electricity, the old technology is still relevant. Why do you think roofs in cold regions were made in this particular shape? Are you ready to find out what was hidden under the feet of a medieval resident?
Steady now.
The floor in a medieval house was perhaps the weakest point in the thermal defense system. In most cases, it was simply compacted earth, sometimes covered with a layer of clay or, in the best houses, stone slabs. The ground froze in winter, and the cold slowly but surely rose from below, turning the floor into an ice slab. No carpets or skins could completely stop this process of heat exchange with the frozen ground. People almost never walked barefoot, even inside their own homes. Shoes were a mandatory part of home attire. The cold from the floor caused constant discomfort and was the cause of many diseases of the feet and pelvic organs. To escape this, furniture was made with legs, raising beds and benches as high as possible. Sleeping on the floor at minus 20 degrees was tantamount to suicide, regardless of the number of blankets. In wealthy homes and castles, the floors were covered with a thick layer of reeds or straw, which was changed several times a year. This layer created an air gap and slightly insulated the feet from the icy stone or earth. However, this bedding quickly accumulated dirt and food debris and became a breeding ground for unsanitary conditions. Modern heated floors or even simple laminate flooring with underlayment would have seemed like a miracle from the future to a medieval person.
Smells hearty tonight.
Wooden floors raised above the ground on joists appeared much later and became a real revolution. The air cushion under the floor cut off direct contact with the frozen ground, making the house much warmer. But even a wooden floor without insulation remained cold due to drafts coming from the underground. Gaps between the boards were inevitable, and cold air from the basement penetrated the house through them. A modern foundation with an insulated Swedish slab completely solves the problem of cold from the ground. We cut off the house from the ground with layers of polystyrene foam and concrete, creating a sealed foundation. This is one of the main advantages of modern architecture, which cannot be replicated using primitive methods. Without modern polymers, the fight against the cold from the ground was a losing battle. The second floor, or living rooms, above the utility rooms provided refuge from the cold ground. The heat from the animals kept below rose up and warmed the floor of the living area. It was a kind of warm floor powered by biological fuel, effective but with corresponding aromas. In our animal-free scenario, this bonus disappears, leaving the medieval house alone with the frozen ground. Cellars and cellars dug under the house also played a dual role. On the one hand, they created a buffer zone where the temperature did not drop below zero. On the other hand, dampness from the cellar penetrated the living quarters, making the cold damp and more noticeable. The fight against dampness was no less important than the fight against frost, but much less successful. The earthen floor had only one advantage. It had enormous inertia and provided coolness in the summer. But in winter, this inertia worked against the residents, sucking the heat out of the air. It was impossible to warm up the earthen floor. The only option was to insulate oneself from it. In this respect, the modern house wins by a landslide. We often take for granted the ability to walk around the house in socks. For people in the past, a warm, dry floor was an unattainable dream, a symbol of heavenly comfort. Cold feet were the norm throughout the winter months. The technological gap in flooring between the two eras is a chasm that cannot be bridged without chemicals and concrete. Guess what happened next to those who sealed their homes too tightly in an attempt to keep warm? In a medieval home, ventilation was not a matter of convenience, as it is today, but a matter of life and death. The lack of a chimney in early buildings, smoky huts, meant that smoke escaped through special openings under the roof or simply through the door. This provided a constant supply of fresh but icy air, necessary for combustion and breathing. Attempting to completely seal such a house to conserve heat led to the instant accumulation of carbon monoxide. People fell asleep in the warmth and simply did not wake up, becoming victims of the silent killer. Therefore, cracks and drafts were not a bug, but a feature, a necessary element of the safety system. Cold air coming in from outside was the price paid for the ability to safely use open fire inside. Modern houses are built on the principle of a thermos. Complete air tightness, double-glazed windows, vapor barrier films. Ventilation is provided by forced air through recuperators or valves that heat the incoming air. This is incredibly effective in terms of energy conservation, as long as the system is working. But what happens when the electricity goes out and the ventilation stops in a modern airtight house? The house instantly turns into a stuffy plastic box where carbon dioxide and humidity levels rise. The walls begin to weep, the air becomes stale, and without ventilation, which lets in the cold, it becomes impossible to breathe. A medieval house breathed on its own through the porous materials of the walls and the looseness of the structures. In minus 20-degree frost, the draft in a medieval house was an icy scourge. It found every loophole, penetrating under clothing, cooling corners, and making it unbearable to stand near the wall. Doors were hung with heavy skins or felt to create some kind of barrier to the cold air. But even these measures could not stop the infiltration of frost in strong winds. The paradox of ventilation was that to keep warm, it was necessary to reduce the flow of air, but to keep the fire going, it was necessary to increase it. This balance was sought every night by adjusting the dampers and plugging the cracks with rags. A mistake in the calculations could cost the whole family their lives, either from the cold or from smoke inhalation. In the modern world, we entrust this balance to automation and sensors, having completely lost the skill of manual climate control. We do not feel the movement of air until we become stuffy or cold. Medieval people felt air currents on their skin, understanding the physics of their homes on an instinctive level. Windows in the Middle Ages were tiny loopholes, often covered with ox bladder or oiled cloth. They let in little light, but they also lost less heat than huge modern stained glass windows. Glass windows were an insane luxury, and oddly enough, a worse insulator than several layers of oiled cloth. The battle for air was an invisible front in the war against winter. Modern houses win in terms of comfort, but lose in terms of the autonomy of their walls breathing. Which system do you think is safer in the event of a prolonged disaster? Are you ready to learn how walls can accumulate heat? When we talk about surviving in the cold, the key factor is not only how quickly a house loses heat, but also how it accumulates it. In this regard, medieval and modern houses operate on completely different physical principles. The massive walls of old houses, whether made of stone, adobe, or very thick logs, had enormous thermal inertia. This characteristic allowed the building to literally absorb the energy of the fire, turning it into a giant battery. To heat such a colossal mass of material, builders and owners needed several days of continuous intensive heating. This was incredibly fuel-intensive, because first you had to heat the walls themselves, not just the air inside. But once they had accumulated energy, these walls themselves became a source of soft and pleasant radiant heat, giving it back to the living room. The heat exchange process was continuous, creating a special microclimate inside the room. Even if the fire in the hearth completely died out by morning, the massive walls continued to warm the inhabitants for several more hours, preventing the temperature from falling to critical levels. This effectively smoothed out daily temperature fluctuations, making cold winter nights more tolerable for people. People could sleep peacefully, knowing that the house would not cool down instantly after the last spark burned out. Inertia was an invisible protector that preserved life in the darkest and coldest hours. Modern frame houses or buildings made of lightweight aerated concrete have extremely low thermal inertia. They heat up very quickly, literally in a couple of hours of powerful heating equipment operation, which is very convenient for the fast pace of modern life. You can arrive at a cold country house and be walking around in a t-shirt an hour later. This seems like a huge achievement of progress, but there is a downside to this coin. As soon as the heating is turned off for some reason, such buildings cool down as quickly as they heated up. They simply do not have a heat reserve in the wall structures themselves that could maintain the temperature. In the event of a power failure at minus 20 degrees, a modern frame house will freeze to zero in a matter of hours. The entire modern comfort system in such houses is completely dependent on a continuous supply of external energy. Wooden log houses, recognized classics of northern house construction, have always occupied an intermediate position between stone and lightweight structures. Natural wood has good heat capacity and, at the same time, has uniquely low thermal conductivity, making it an ideal material for harsh winters. The walls of a log house always felt warm to the touch, unlike icy stone or burnt brick. This was perceived as much more comfortable by the residents, both psychologically and physically. The logs accumulated heat during the daylight hours and slowly released it in portions during the cold nights. The wood acted as a natural filter, keeping the cold outside and maintaining comfort inside the room. This is why it is so easy to breathe in wooden houses, even with the windows closed. Traditional log houses combine the reliability of an ancient fortress with the comfort of modern eco-friendly housing. The interior partitions and massive stoves in old houses also worked as effective additional heat accumulators. The famous Russian stove is, in essence, a huge mountain of brick or clay in the very center of the house. Once thoroughly heated, it kept the heat inside for a whole day, and sometimes even longer. The entire life of the family revolved around this warm mountain, from cooking to sleeping. In a modern house, there are practically no such massive and heavy elements. All hope is placed solely on the constant circulation of warm air. We have consciously removed mass from our homes, making them light, airy, and very mobile, but at the same time extremely dependent on technology. Without pumps, boilers, and sensors, such a house quickly becomes uninhabitable. We have exchanged autonomy for instant comfort and ease of construction. The problem with the inertia of a medieval house was that if it did freeze, bringing it back to life was a titanic task. Heating a completely frozen stone castle is a task that takes many weeks of hard work. During this time, water from abundant condensation will constantly drip down the cold walls, creating dampness. A modern house can be started up much faster, but in the event of a long energy shortage, it remains completely helpless. Thermal inertia is a kind of safety cushion that in the distant past was a built-in and mandatory option for any home. Today, this feature has become a rarity, available only to owners of very expensive and massive brick houses. In the context of the current energy crisis, the physical mass of materials is once again becoming crucial. History is coming full circle, and we are once again beginning to appreciate what once seemed excessively heavy to us. Windows have always been the most vulnerable point of defense in the battle against the cold, a kind of hole in the armor of a house. In medieval dwellings, people tried to minimize their number and size, guided by simple logic. Fewer holes meant less cold. Windows were often tiny slits that were tightly closed for the winter, with wooden shutters stuffed with straw or felt. Inside, there was constant semi-darkness, but that was the price to pay for preserving precious heat. Instead of glass, which was incredibly expensive and rare, oiled paper, cloth, or thinly tanned animal skins were used. These materials allowed dim, diffused light to pass through, but did not retain heat at all and were constantly torn by the wind. Mica, used in some regions, was better, but consisted of many small pieces held together with lead, which created cold bridges. In essence, a window was simply a hole to the street covered with a film. Modern architecture has gone down the path of panoramic glazing, turning walls into transparent showcases. Multi-chamber, double-glazed windows with inert gases and coatings work wonders, retaining heat better than old brickwork. We now have the opportunity to enjoy sunlight and scenery, even in the bitter cold, without feeling uncomfortable. However, at temperatures of -20 degrees Celsius and below, even the best double-glazed windows become cold to the touch and begin to radiate coolness. If the heating is turned off, the huge windows of a modern house become the main gateway for heat loss. The glazing area in a modern cottage is dozens of times larger than in a medieval house, which plays a fatal role in an emergency. Medieval inhabitants made the most of daylight hours, rising at dawn and going to bed at sunset so as not to waste candles and cool down the house. The windows were mainly located on the south side to catch the scarce rays of the winter sun. This was passive solar heating in its most primitive but effective form. The north wall of the house was often completely blank, without a single opening. Shutters played a huge role, essentially serving as a second removable wall. At night, when the temperature dropped, closed shutters created an additional air chamber in front of the window. In modern homes, shutters are rarely used and are more often used to protect against burglary than against the cold. We have forgotten how effectively windows can be insulated from the outside. Glass itself is a cold material, and sitting by the window in the Middle Ages was impossible due to the downward flow of icy air. The areas by the windows were dead zones, unsuitable for living in winter. Modern radiators are always placed under windows, precisely to cut off this cold flow with a thermal curtain. The lack of light depressed people's psyche, forcing them to live for months in twilight in soot. Depression and apathy were frequent companions of the winter period. The modern home gives us light and psychological comfort, but makes us vulnerable to the physics of glass. The transparency of walls is an achievement of civilization that requires constant energy input. Close your eyes and imagine winter without electric light and with windows boarded up. This is the reality of the past. The difference in approaches to lighting shows how much our priorities have changed, from preserving heat to quality of life.
It is cold tonight.
How did people survive in huge, cold houses when it was physically impossible to heat them all? The answer is simple. They didn't try to do so, applying the principle of strict zoning of living space. In a medieval house in winter, life was confined to 1 or 2 rooms where there was a hearth and where the whole family gathered. Huge reception rooms, guest bedrooms, and corridors were preserved and turned into icy passageways that were only entered when absolutely necessary. Sleeping arrangements were organized according to the house-within-a-house principle. Beds with canopies and thick curtains were not a luxury. They were isolated micro-capsules, inside which the breath of the sleepers created a comfortable temperature. Cupboard beds were often used, wooden boxes with doors, where a person slept in a semi-sitting position, retaining their body heat in a closed space. This allowed them to sleep in a room with a temperature of around 0 without the risk of hypothermia. The modern house is designed as a single open space where air flows freely between the kitchen, living room, and hall. It is beautiful and spacious, but from the point of view of survival in the cold, it is a disaster. It is impossible to heat such a volume without a powerful heating system. Warm air simply dissipates in the cubic space. The absence of doors and partitions makes it impossible to create a warm living area and cut off the cold areas. Medieval people also actively used textiles for zoning, carpets on the walls, thick tapestries in doorways, and canopies over tables. Fabric created additional barriers to air movement and made rooms visually and tactilely warmer. Each room was an isolated compartment that could be heated or not heated independently of the others. Clothing was the last line of defense. People wore layers of woolen garments, hats, and even gloves at home. The concept of home clothes in the form of t-shirts and shorts would have been considered madness. People dressed to withstand the cold inside their own homes, not relying solely on walls and hearths. We are used to using 100% of our home space all year round. The idea of locking up half the rooms in winter and living together in the kitchen seems wild to us. But it was precisely this strategy of concentrating resources that allowed people to survive the harshest winters with minimal supplies of firewood. The density of the inhabitants raised the temperature simply through the heat of their bodies. In a modern house, with its high ceilings and skylights, all the heat accumulates where no one is, under the roof. In low medieval rooms, the heat was where people sat. Architecture was adapted to people, rather than forcing people to serve architecture. The division into clean and dirty, warm halves of the house remained in villages until the 20th century. The winter hut was small and cramped, while the summer hut was spacious and bright. This seasonal migration within one's own home was a wise decision. Today we have lost the culture of seasonal adaptation of housing, relying on the power of boilers and pumps. But if they stop, we will have to relearn how to build huts out of blankets in the middle of the living room. The history of zoning is a guide to survival in conditions of energy shortage. Who will actually survive at minus 30 degrees when the lights go out and the pipes cool down? The honest and disappointing answer is that the modern home is a colossus with feet of clay, completely dependent on infrastructure. Without electricity, gas boiler circulation pumps stop. Without gas, heating systems freeze, and the house turns into a glass and concrete trap. It cools down rapidly, its huge windows and thin walls unable to retain heat without constant replenishment. And the lack of autonomous heat sources, such as a stove, leaves no chance of survival. A medieval house, for all its poverty, dampness, and discomfort, was a self-sufficient system designed for autonomous existence. Its thick walls, small windows, and the presence of a hearth allowed it to sustain life, albeit on the brink of survival, for an unlimited time, as long as there was something to burn. It did not depend on the gas network operator or a substation failure. Its viability depended solely on the physical efforts of its inhabitants. However, this does not mean that a medieval house was better. It was simply adapted to the worst. Life in it was a constant struggle against the cold, full of smoke, drafts, and diseases that we have long forgotten. Survival in it was guaranteed not by comfort, but by the endurance of people and their willingness to endure hardships that would break a modern person in a couple of days. We have become softer, our demands for comfort have grown, and our ability to tolerate the cold has atrophied. A modern energy-efficient house with solar panels, a heat pump, and a fireplace stove, not decorative, could be the ideal winner. By combining insulation technologies with the autonomy of the past, we get a hybrid capable of withstanding the elements. But most typical buildings today do not have such insurance, relying on the stability of civilization, which can collapse from a single ice storm. The paradox is that a poor peasant in a straw hut had a better chance of surviving the winter without outside help than a millionaire in a smart home penthouse without electricity. Technology has given us an incredible standard of living, but it has taken away our independence from the system. We have traded the reliability of stone and wood for the efficiency of foam and dependence on wires. Frost is a great equalizer that quickly puts everything in its place, punishing arrogance and disregard for the laws of physics. The history of architecture shows that we have moved from protection to comfort, gradually forgetting that the main function of a house is to keep us alive. Today's crisis or accident can be a harsh reminder of this simple truth. The Middle Ages would win this battle in the autonomy category, but would lose in the quality of life category. The modern world wins in comfort, but suffers a fiasco when resources are lost. The true winner is the one who can combine the thermal insulation of the future with the reliability and simplicity of the past. Take a look at your home right now and ask yourself, how many hours will it last if the city is plunged into darkness? You may not like the answer, but it's better to know it in advance than to find out the hard way at -30 degrees. Survival is not a question of technology, it is a question of readiness and adaptation to changing environmental conditions. We have taken apart the walls, roofs, and floors, but the most important thing in a house is the person who must be ready to fight for warmth. We have seen that there is no such thing as a perfect shelter. Stone castles were refrigerators, modern cottages are thermoses dependent on the grid, and peasant huts are warm but dangerous burrows. The true price of comfort is our vulnerability, and the price of autonomy is hard, daily labor, and deprivation. The answer to the question, who will survive, lies not in bricks, but in the ability to use the advantages of one's home and level out its disadvantages. What would you choose? To survive the winter in a modern house without heating, or in a medieval hut with a stove, but without amenities? Write your choice in the comments and subscribe to the channel to learn more uncomfortable truths about our history.